Everyone has a story to tell. Welcome to DingoTalk, where we explore the experiences that make us who we are. Here's your host, Carlo Guadagnino.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is DingoTalk. My guest this week is the head football coach at Ohio Northern University, Coach Andy Freeze. But before we get into Coach Freeze's story, let's tell you a little bit about Ohio Northern University, and bear with me, this is going to be a little different than we normally do. Also, I want to remind everybody that these interviews were pre-recorded, so a lot of this was done as the coaches were approaching camp. So it's just an insight into where their brain is, and then obviously telling their story. Ohio Northern is located in Ada, Ohio, and here's the interesting part. This is where I wanted to tell you. Normally, I would give you the enrollment numbers. ONU has 5 colleges. They have the Arts and Science College, they have the Business Administration College, they have the Engineering College, the Pharmacy College, and the Law College. Cost before aid is about $37,000, a little under. Cost after aid is $25,000. The acceptance rate is 73%, and the graduation rate is between 67 and 77%, with most graduates graduating within 6 years. And again, as I tell you every week, make sure that if Ohio Northern or any of the schools that you've heard us talk about are who you are interested in, make sure you talk to your guidance counselors, you do your own research, you talk to your coaches, you talk to their coaches. But for specifically Ohio Northern, and you want more information on them, you can go to www.onu.edu. And that being said, it's now time to tell Coach Freeze's story. This is our second Ohio Northern coach that we've had. Really excited about the way this conversation went with Coach Freeze. And interesting enough, a little tidbit about Ada. I believe he informed me that all the footballs, the NFL balls and whatnot, are made in Ada, Ohio. So it's not my job to tell his story, though. It's his job. So without further ado, this is Coach Freeze. What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is Dingo Talk. My guest this week is the head football coach at Ohio Northern, Coach Andy Freeze. Coach, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate us being able to spend some time together here.
Absolutely. Coach, I'm going to do this the same way we do every week. I'm going to throw you in the time machine real quick. We're going to get to know kind of you and your resume, and then we'll start talking about the Ohio Northern program. So talk to me about 2005, Andy. How did he find his way to Otterbein?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think everybody, especially at our level, probably has their own unique recruiting story. My dad was about a 2-month college basketball player at Adrian College up in Michigan before he found out that that's not what he wanted to do, but he stayed in school up there at Adrian. And so for me, my mom also went to Capital, which is also another layer in the Otterbein Capital opportunity there with everything. And so for me, it was just, I knew a small school was probably better for me academically. I wasn't the best student in high school. I knew if I went to a bigger school, I probably was going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit. And I went on a college visit to Adrian because that's where Dad went. And then I got one phone call throughout that recruiting cycle from a D Coker down at Otterbein. And he said, "Hey, come check us out." I went down there. And it was just one of those things. As soon as you step foot on campus, that was where you're supposed to be. And, fortunately for me, made a really great decision to go to Otterbein. And so 2005, Andy graduated in the summer, went in as a freshman at Otterbein in the fall. And, that was back in the days of quarters and being, not starting school until September. So we had a month-long football camp with 3 days, and there wasn't no days off. It wasn't anything like that. It was 3 days for about a month straight of just football, and really got indoctrinated to college football in that way. And, I look at that experience as something that was really unique. I think my roommate hung it up on day 3. So I was in a dorm room by myself, not knowing anybody on campus for about a month, just kind of grinding through and saying, "Hey, this is," people back home always say, "Well, how long you think you're going to play? How long?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not, I know I'm going to make it through at least the first season because I owe it to myself to do that and want to do that." And, one season turned into 4 pretty quickly in a lot of ways. My freshman year was, I think I played, 20 varsity snaps, something along those lines. So played a little bit my freshman year. Not a lot was expected of me. I wasn't, like I said, I went on one college visit, so I wasn't some highly recruited offensive lineman, anything along those lines. And my sophomore year, an opportunity came up that the guy that was there my freshman year wasn't coming back, and there was an open spot, and there was kind of a competition. And I think I started, seven games. I think my sophomore year. Typical college stuff. Probably should have been 10, but number one, we didn't play very well throughout the year. I didn't play very well and made some off the field choices that maybe weren't the best, and had the opportunity to play in 7 games. And then, would come back my junior, senior year. 19 games started. There was a story there that I can go into if you want to, but it's not really here for this. It wasn't any big deal. It was just a family matter, but started, I'm sorry, 20 to 21 games because we made the playoffs for the first time my senior year in 2008. That was the year we went 9-1, lost to Mount Union in the OAC, played Franklin College in the first round of the playoffs. All the accolades that came along with being, somehow the best offensive lineman on that team and a team captain. Ended up being conference player of the year in the offensive line room. Ended up being an all-region player and third-team All-American on D3Football.com. So, you go from not highly recruited, not highly touted, to all of a sudden being a really important piece to a really great team when I was down there in Westerville was something that I think kind of wet my whistle, so to speak, and getting into coaching. Graduated in that 2008, 2009 timeframe when either A, I wasn't very good at getting a job, or B, the economy wasn't the best in hiring too. So I think it was a combination of both of those. And, I sat down with some coaches, I sat down with my parents and said, well, what am I good at right now? And I was good at football at the time. And so for me, it was just kind of trying to figure out, okay, hey, what's the next steps? What does that look like? What does that explore? And, like I said, I think, I'm a big believer in faith. God puts you in the right places at the right times, and I was put at Otterbein at the right place to be able to really flourish and have an unbelievable 4 years, make a ton of memories. Best man in my wedding was my right tackle. I was the left tackle. The kicker was in the wedding, like other guys, and so it's just those relationships, those bonds you form, really put me on a path to being able to say, okay, hey, I'm going to coach, and what's that look like? I got my undergrad in communications, couldn't really teach, so I went back, got my master's degree in education, and kind of the rest is history, so to speak.
Now, did you, when you went back for your master's first, again, I said this to you before we started recruiting, it's nice to have another communications guy. We don't always, it's a lot of the time it's the history, and then we went and got the teaching certificate. And
yeah,
so that's a nice change. But I noticed that, 2012, you get your master's in teaching from Otterbein. Mm-hmm. Did you take and just become a full-time student for your time going into getting your master's?
So I lucked into it. There was a graduate assistant opportunity that opened up at Otterbein. So I was graduate assistant with the football program at Otterbein. That degree was about 2 years. I took a lot of classes over the summer and did some of those things as well too. So the 2 years there from I believe it was March of 2010 to about May of 2012, I was taking classes. I was coaching tight ends, varsity tight ends, helping out with JV, doing all the typical graduate assistant work, breaking down film, all of those things. Eventually we ended up hiring. When I first got hired, there was only 2 graduate assistants, and while I was there, we were able to hire 2 more. So that obviously made the work a little bit easier for us. We had 2 guys on offense, 2 guys on defense that were really kind of cutting tape, doing all the GA work, all that stuff, and that was that opportunity to springboard. And it was interesting too because I had an opportunity. I played for Joe Loth, who was he was the head coach at WestCon up until about a couple months ago, and then he went to Southern Connecticut Division II. But I played for Joe, and it was always really interesting because as a player, the perception of J-Lo, as we called him, was a little bit different than working on staff with him. And, I've been able to continue that relationship with him for a long time. And, he was a great guy to learn under, of being a head coach and just learning, like, okay, hey, maybe now we know why he operates the way he does. And maybe now he knows why some of those things. And I think that's the best thing that I've been able to do from a coaching perspective is I've had a few different stops before I got to kind of the ultimate spot and where I wanted to be. So I've had a chance to kind of pull from a lot of different head coaches and a different level. I worked a year at Division II. So that was a really great experience. And so all those stops, you kind of learn something new, like maybe this does work, maybe this doesn't work. And you got to kind of frame it into your own mind as well too, and make sure you're still yourself and your personality.
Right. Now, with those 2 years, I've asked everybody that's had that opportunity after graduating, they then turn around, they put the khakis in the clipboard, and the visor in hand. Um, what is that experience like going from player to, like you said, March of 2010, you're no longer player, you're now coach. How does that, and how do you, what advice would you give to younger coaches that are thinking of making that mesh from player to coach?
Yeah, and the one thing that wasn't mentioned in there, like that was March of 2010. So I graduated in May of 2009, or June of 2009, I should say. And then I went back to my high school in the fall of 2009, Norwalk High School. So I had 1 year where I was like the true green 22-year-old volunteer coach that didn't know up from down. So I got to learn under a first year head coach, or the head coach who was in his first year at Norwalk High, Chris McFarland, who's down in Georgia now, coaching at Rome High School in Georgia. And so like, and we were a 1-9 football team that won the last game of the season. So that was a heck of a first kind of baptism into college, into high school coaching. And so for me, that's what kind of was like, okay, hey, maybe I do like coaching, maybe I do like the teaching aspect and doing those things. And that's, so after that season, I was living at home still, making money, substitute teaching, being a volunteer high school football coach. And then I said, okay, hey, how do I look through this? So I was in
Right.
the building, I still knew a lot of my old teachers and they were helping me out. If they had a sub they needed, they'd reach out. But then I started applying for jobs and got to Otterbein. And to answer your question directly now, so I had a gap in there, right? So that senior class that was only a year under me, like those guys were all gone. So I was kind of this mythical creature a little bit to the seniors that were coming up because I was old enough where I didn't really hang out with those guys and do too much, but I was still social with them and everything
Mm-hmm.
along those lines. And I think the biggest thing is you have to be yourself. Those guys have to have a certain respect for you. And luckily for me, like I said, I think they saw me coming in as a guy who had a really great career, understood that, and did those things. But the group I was coaching, the tight ends, they were all a bit on the younger side. So they were freshmen, sophomores. So they didn't really see Andy Freeze as a senior doing those things. But I think the biggest thing you just have to be yourself and understand that there's a line there, right? And one of the things Joe always did a really great job of is he's like, hey, you're not their friend anymore, right? They're your coach. You demand them to treat you that way, and you still have those relationships, just like we have relationships with guys now too. But for us, it's just okay. Hey, there's no more blurred line. Like it's pretty cut and dry. At least that's how it was explained to me. I know everybody else kind of answered the question a little differently for you, but for me, it was pretty cut and dry. Like, hey, this is the line. You don't cross the line. You're their coach now. They don't call you man. They don't call you bro. They don't call you this. They call you coach. And that's how we handled it. And like I said, the guys in the tight end room that I was coaching weren't really guys that I had played with as much either because they were either younger or freshmen, sophomores by the time I,
Right.
I got back to Otterbein.
Now, so you have your master's degree, uh, and the Lakeland position comes up. Why? Yeah, Lakeland. Why was that the first stop outside of Otterbein? Why was that where you, as an official coach, not as a volunteer coach? Not that they're not official
Yeah.
coaches, but
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Side piece to that, quick side note, I was actually hired at Lakeland as the head track and field coach, assistant football. So that was an interesting role going back to Division III, having a lot of different roles and doing those things. So didn't have much track experience, a little bit in high school, but that was about it. But that was good enough to get me the job. And to be quite honest, why Lakeland was because that was the one school that I could get a job. I
okay,
interviewed maybe for one or two other positions. I don't really remember. I know I interviewed at Lakeland, and I was lucky enough to get the job. It was that typical first Division III football experience where, I could put money in retirement, but I wasn't making a lot otherwise. And
right,
I was single at the time, living in an apartment that I could walk to and from work. Doing that typical stuff, and had the one season at Lakeland there, which again that was a great experience. I never lived outside of Ohio. I'd never really been outside of my hometown, Norwalk or Columbus area, and I knew as like I made the decision somewhere along the line of being a GA. I made the decision of saying, okay, hey, I know I can coach high school football and teach high school football pretty much anytime you want, right? But if I want to be able to coach college football, I got to be comfortable probably not being where I want to be initially and doing those things. And so for me, it was that opportunity. Kevin Doherty was the head coach at the time at Lakeland, and he gave me the opportunity to come up there and coach up there. And again, that was interesting because that was my first time out of the OAC in college football. So it was
hmm
different schools, different locations. Wisconsin is, I've been on both sides of Lake Michigan. Wisconsin in the wintertime is nothing to mess with. I wasn't there too long in the winter, but it's cold up there. Basically November through spring. And so for us, that was a unique experience to go up there and see some things at Lakeland.
And then when the Wilmington position came open, that brings you back to the OAC.
Hmm.
Was that
Yeah.
was that attractive as well? Coming back to the conference, being a little bit more confident in your abilities as a coach, and getting to be back in a conference that you were comfortable coaching in.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, it was, I did my year in Wisconsin and had a really great experience. But anytime you can get back home, I think that's always going to be super important for anybody. And my girlfriend, wife now at the time, she was in grad school. She was just starting grad school at Miami in Oxford, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Wisconsin. She was getting ready to start grad school. Now all of a sudden, instead of being Wisconsin to Ohio, we're only about an hour and a half apart from Wilmington to Oxford. And so again, the Lord works in mysterious ways sometimes, and that got us closer together. And eventually, again, we got engaged while she was in school, and that our first home was in Wilmington. We got married when we were in Wilmington. And again, you look at the coaching staff I worked with there. Stacy Hairston was the head coach, who's an Ohio Northern alum, coincidentally. He played in the NFL, and I thought, what a great guy to be able to go learn something from and be around. Greg Forrest was our offensive coordinator. He worked with Brian Kelly for a long time at Central Michigan and Cincinnati. Again, another Ohio Northern alum. And so there, again, those small connections with everything. And, just had a really great opportunity. And, we didn't have a ton of success, obviously, from the wins and losses standpoint, but it did allow me to kind of grow as being a young offensive line coach. And, I valued that. There was definitely some lessons I took out of that, some good, some bad. But you learn those things, and I still carry some of those through. I got an email from a parent that was unhappy with us not being A, very good, and B, giving his son a chance. I still have that email that I look up every once in a while when I need some motivation to remind myself, like, hey, number one, it's not as bad as we think it is, and number two, we've come a long way just personally.
Right. Now, 2 years, 3 years. We call it 3 years in Wilmington.
Two, 2 seasons at Wilmington. So the
Okay.
fall of 23, fall of 13, fall of 14.
Okay. And then it was time to come home.
Then it was time to come
Why?
home.
Why was that? What was that situation like? How did that develop?
So that was a surprising turn. I was at Wilmington. I wasn't thinking much of it. Head coach at the time was Tim Daup, who is an Otterbein alum. He was the offensive coordinator, offensive line coach that I played for, and then I was a GA on his staff as well too. And then when Joe left to go to WestCon, Tim got the job at Otterbein, and he called me and said, "Hey, I think we're going to have some movement on staff." And at the time, the initial phone call was, "Hey, I want you to come coach linebackers and be the special teams coordinator." And I said, "Well, coach, I love you to death. He's like my second father figure in life. I'd love you to death. I don't know much about specials. I don't know much about linebackers, but if you trust me enough, I'm going to do it." And so I end up being able to have a conversation with him. And, probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks goes by. Next conversation I have, he's like, "Hey, actually, I'm going to coach the linebackers and you're going to coach specials and O-line." And I was like, "Okay, O-line, we can talk about. That's great." Number one, pretty flattering too for the guy that coached me to be able to say, "Hey, I trust you enough." Because us O-line guys are weird, right? Like we don't really like a lot of guys having their hands in our mix and everything. Like
Mm-mm.
for him to be like, "Nope, I trust you. I'm going to let you coach the O-line. I'm going to let you handle that. But you got to do the specials for us too." So that was a very interesting hat, which actually led me to my next job, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, here in a second at Davenport. But so for 3 seasons, I got to go home. My wife's also an Otterbein alum, so we got to live in Columbus. I got to live the dream of working for my alma mater, a place that's very special, and give back to those kids so much that was given to me at Otterbein. And so for me, it was, I had those 3 years. I think each year we got progressively better. I think we went 4-6, 5-5, 6-4. I think was the progression.
Mhm.
My last year there, we had 1,000-yard quarterback or 1,000-yard rushing quarterback, in addition to about 2,500 yards passing. So we were really, really dynamic offensively in a lot of ways. Obviously, we wish some more wins could have come with that, but we got a little bit better each year. And at that time, I sat back after that season, and I think the hardest thing in this profession sometimes is knowing when it's time to look because, like I said, for me, I needed some growth. I was the special teams coordinator, offensive line coach. I wanted an opportunity to be a coordinator at some point. That
Mhm.
that wasn't going to be possible at Otterbein, which was fine. And so I had a hard conversation with a guy I love a lot that said, "Hey, I think I've reached my maximum here. I think I've done the most I can do, and I think I'm ready to look." And I think there was 5 jobs that I interviewed for throughout the course of that kind of recruiting cycle off season. One job I really wanted, I didn't get. Another job that I turned down that was an offensive coordinator job. And so I went through the whole range. Like there was a high school head coaching job that I got offered that I said, no, now's not the right time.
Right.
And so I kind of shut it down for that period of time with everything. And end up in July, I get a call from somebody that knows Sparky McEwen up at Davenport. And you go through that process, and it's Division II, it's GLIAC. Coincidentally enough, they were looking for a offensive line coach, special teams coordinator, which is just crazy because I fit that bill, obviously, and went
Right.
up, interviewed with Sparky and his staff, and really felt like I did a good job. Like I said, I had 5 interviews beforehand, so if I couldn't at least be really good in an interview at that point, then that's on me.
Right.
And it worked out, and Sparky took a chance on me, and I went up there and to Davenport and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and had a really great fall. And as we turned it into spring there, my wife and daughter were still in Columbus because I got the job in July. My wife was pregnant with our son at the time, and that was the hardest decision I've made in the coaching profession. Was in that April, I had to get out of coaching because family is really important to me, and I said, you know what, I'm not sold on this. We're better off in Columbus, welcoming our son that summer and everything. And like I said, I still feel bad to this day because I really enjoyed my experience at Davenport, and I got to the Division II level, which a lot of guys, there's a lot of really great Division III football coaches that don't ever get that chance, and I got that chance and had to leave fairly quickly, and that was disappointing from a personal and professional level. But again, my family's more important than this job, and I think that's just something that was really great, and I got a lot of experience in the GLIAC, and we had a great start to the year. Then we had a tough end of the year, but that's the GLIAC, and we did some really great things. And again, that was an awesome staff to be able to work with. That was a lot different too.
Side note, what a football name. Sparky? I
Spark,
mean,
Spark, Sparky's great. He's a Grand Rapids guy too, so he knows everybody. Like
oh yeah.
Sparky's one of the most awesome guys I've worked for, just because again his personality is so dynamic, and he's a very different head coach than any of the head coaches I had ever worked for, and I think that was super important. Again, part of that development, right, where all of a sudden like it's not always you're not always going to get the same thing day to day. And as an
Right.
assistant coach, you better be ready for that. But again, he treated me great. He gave a Division III guy an opportunity, and again, regret is a strong word, but that's where I feel like I let him down a little bit, and it's just working through those things. But it all works out as it should. And again, it was a really great experience to be up there in Michigan. Being an Ohio guy, I don't really care Ohio State, Michigan, but being in Michigan, like the western part of Michigan is a really great place if you're from there. You got Lake Michigan. Like I said, I've been on both sides. I've been on the Michigan side, been on the Wisconsin side. Sheboygan was a great city too. So evidently, Lake Michigan is just a really great spot if you know the right spots to go.
Do you prefer the Michigan side or the Wisconsin side?
I won't. Unfortunately, I was probably in both those places for about the same amount of time. I will say Western Michigan was much colder than I remember Wisconsin being, but I was in Michigan longer than I was. I made it from about July until April in Michigan, and in Wisconsin I was August to January. So,
Right.
Michigan, there was snow on the ground. All I remember, there was snow on the ground from November until about March. It was that was a brutal winter, but it was fine. Michigan, Wisconsin, all those places I've been have been really great.
Now, Coach, I'm looking at the resume here, and I see that, and based on what you just told us, you took a break,
Yep.
and then you decided to come back into coaching in 2020. There was a whole thing going on
Yeah.
in
Uh-huh.
2020.
I
So
remember.
it's just a small thing. Nobody even remembers it anymore. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
How did that come about? How did the interview process go? How did you find yourself at Rose-Hulman?
Yep. So I'm one of those people that, I don't say this lightly, but COVID kind of regenerated and was like it was favorable in my decision, I guess I'll say, right? Because the hiring cycles were all messed up. There was no fall season, anything along those lines. And those are some hard conversations you have with your wife, right? Like I said, I leave, I get out of coaching. I work with a buddy in the insurance field, and I tell you what, anybody that wants to be humbled, you think recruiting stuff, start making 300 phone calls a weekend to try to get some appointments to set up to sell some insurance plans. But again, that all helps, right? Communications
Mhm.
background, recruiting, like there's some tradable assets and some tradable skills there. But I have those conversations with my wife that I ultimately we agreed like, hey, I feel really comfortable as a football coach, and if the right opportunity comes up, what do you think? And luckily I had her blessing to say, if the right one comes up, we'll talk about it and figure it out. So really in probably August, September, which again, just weird hiring cycles, right? Like it was
Right.
favorable for me. I didn't have a job, right? Which a lot of people like couldn't get jobs or, were out of a job or anything. So I didn't have a job. So I was pretty flexible on being able to say, well, if you need me, I'm there. As far as coaching, I like I said, the insurance stuff, but that's all a different story. So for me, it was okay. If we find something that's close that we feel like's a good fit, like let's pursue it. And the offensive coordinator job opened up at Rose-Hulman. I had met Jeff Sokol just one time previously. We had a little meeting at Otterbein where we had several different schools from conferences come in and kind of do like a, you know, poor man's meeting of the minds that they do on the East Coast with everything. And they came in, we talked football, and I don't know if you remember me at all from that, but again, I was evidently in the right candidate pool that I had a chance to, do the initial, everything was over Zoom, just like this is when Zoom kind of took off with everything too, right? So you do your initial interview, you do all that
Mhm.
stuff, and Jeff calls me back a few days later and he's like, well, hey, he's going through it. And I thought it was like hey, you did a really great job, but it ended up turning around. He's like, I say all that to, say, hey, we'd love to have you join our staff. And so that was, I was lucky. I said, well, coach, I did this last time without my wife. I need my wife to be all in on this one. So I really like an opportunity to come visit campus, see what it's like and all
Mhm.
those things. Rose-Hulman a little bit, at least I did, just as an engineering background. They had a engineering school and you're like, I don't really know it well, but you drive out to Terre Haute and it just became really apparent that the campus community was amazing. Jeff was a great guy to work for, getting to know him and work with him. And like I said, moving during COVID, yeah, it was a hassle, but for us, we made it work, which was really nice too. And so we moved in November. I should say I moved in November of 2020. Coincidentally enough, actually, the first time I ever swabbed my nose for a COVID test was when I was working at Rose-Hulman, and the very first time I tested positive for COVID. So that was like my wife and my kids were supposed to come see me that weekend. So we're like, what do we do? And luckily, my wife, she wasn't too worried. She's like, well, I'm coming to see you because we had bought the house. She hadn't seen the house. I think I bought the last three houses that she hasn't seen before she's moved in. So that's a coaching tale as well too. But so we had all that lined up, and she's like, "Well, I'm bringing the kids. You want to see the kids, but you won't be able to see them as much because I didn't." Nobody knew anything at that point. So,
Right.
but luckily it wasn't like I had no symptoms. I wouldn't have even known anything was different. So I got lucky on that front. But yeah, so then we started in November of 20, had the spring season in 21, and we were off and running at Rose-Hulman and Terre Haute.
Now, Coach, let's fast forward to the end of your time at Rose-Hulman. My question
Mhm.
is, talk to me about the interview process for the job that you're doing right now as the head guy at
Yep.
Ohio Northern. How does how is it different from when you interview for a coordinator position, position coach, even as a GA? What's the biggest conversation difference?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is just the stakeholders you talk to on campus, right? As an assistant coach, you go through, you might meet with the AD
Mm-hmm.
just because it's the athletic director, that's who you're working for, right? You're going to meet with the head coach, have an opportunity to meet with the coordinators on staff. If you're interviewing for a position coach, you're definitely going to meet with that coordinator. If you're interviewing for a coordinator spot, I know my Rose-Hulman interview, like I interviewed with the defensive coordinator, and he had questions for me. So but to be the head coach, all of a sudden, you're one on one with the AD. There's no
Right.
other head coach kind of ushering you into the office and say, "Oh, here, by the way, this is our athletic director." You meet with the president, you meet with the VPs on campus, you meet with the stakeholders that are ultimately the people that you're going to be working in tandem with to be able to say, "Okay, hey, this is whether or not we have a healthy football program. This is what we're looking for." And so that's the kind of humbling experience a little bit. And again, I had I knew I was ready to be a head coach, or at least I was
Mm-hmm.
ready for that next step and to explore it. Had two other opportunities. The first one, I didn't make it past the first cut. The second one, I made it past the second cut, but didn't get to on campus. And then this one was the one where it was the third time's the charm, kind of where you start hitting all the boxes. You start knowing what to kind of expect. Who's going to be on the phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
You're a little bit more polished in what you're going to say and how you're going to attack certain situations. So that was what it kind of all lined up for me. And I go back and I wasn't sure who was on the committee. Like I said, I knew plenty of Ohio Northern alums, but the Zoom boxes all pop up, and then all of a sudden there's Stacy Harrison, Ohio Northern alum, a guy I previously worked for, on the call, and there's just that sense of calm a little bit, right? Because you had alumni, you had ADs, you had other coaches, you had.
Hmm.
And that was basically who was on the Zoom interview committee. But you turn that on, and all of a sudden there's a familiar face, and you're just kind of like, okay, I can take a deep breath, right? Stacy knows what I'm about. Maybe doesn't know if I'm ready to be a head coach yet, but nobody
Right.
ever knows that. And so he's just like, okay. And so you hang up and then you give him a call, be like, hey, that was awesome seeing you. Thanks for your time, Stacy. And you get that feedback and everything. So that was the biggest thing, is just meeting with the different people. Whereas a assistant, you're just maybe meeting with the head coach, the AD, and the rest of the staff.
Well, I've asked this question to everybody we've had on the show this season specifically. I'm guessing not a lot of X's and O's. Like by that point, when you're
Yeah.
interviewing for that spot, they assume that the X's and O's part you're good at. But I'm guessing a lot of that conversation is recruiting, retention, uh, community service, community outreach. How's the
Yeah.
academic side of things? Fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest thing is just philosophy, right? Like when you come in here, what is being an Ohio Northern football player going to look like, right? So you go through manuals, you go through things that, and again, I went full tilt. Like I had a website that I had developed. I got on there, put all my manuals, put all my stuff on the website that, basically had a QR code to pass out if I needed to, and said, hey, this is an opportunity for you to go look and see what I'm about. I didn't want to print off the big books and hand out books and, paper and all that stuff. And I'd done that before and it wasn't super successful. So I said, well, hey, let's try it a different way. And so it's much more philosophy driven. Hey, what does it look like? What's recruiting? How do you feel like you get kids here? Tell us about your staff, right? That was another way. I had other interviews where maybe I wasn't fully prepared to say, hey, this is what I want to do staffing wise and figure that stuff out. So you have those conversations with the AD, you have the enrollment questions with the president saying, hey, what does it mean to be an ONU football player? What does that look like? Tell us about roster size. Tell us about what you want out of this. And, that's where you find out like, okay, hey, this is what they're looking for. This is where maybe this is how we work together. Maybe this is how we have alignment from the top down. And I think that was the biggest takeaway for me when I got here was we just needed to be in alignment all the way up the chain, right? From me to the AD to the VPs to the president, right? As long as everybody in the chain is on the same wavelength, then we're going to have an opportunity to be successful.
Now, talk to me about being named the 29th head coach in a 129-year history of your guys' program. You are our second coach from Ohio Northern that we've had on. Talk to me about what an Ohio Northern guy is and what it meant for you to become the 29th head coach in program history.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously very flattering. Like I said, I had I think at least four other head coaching like interviews. Like I said, not
Mhm.
opportunities because I wasn't given that chance to say yes or no. But I had at least four other opportunities where I was just kind of like soul searching, right? And you're like, man, what if I can't get that one? How am I going to get that one, right? Like, and asking those questions and doing those things. So you come to a place like Ohio Northern, where as an outsider to Ohio Northern, like I said, Otterbein alum, played Ohio Northern 4 years,
Mhm.
beat them only once that playoff year. You're playing against guys like Jason Trusnick, who's on campus right now. He's the head coach at Strongsville. Had a 10-year NFL career, ONU alum. You're how am I going to have the opportunity to get that job? And so you look back and obviously you can't hide away from your history. I'm very lucky to be in a place that has had a pretty successful run probably over the last 20 to 40 years of college football for all intents and purposes, right?
Right.
There's a lot of teams out there that probably wish they were in the playoffs four times, right? There was a lot of teams that wish they had success and winning records and doing those things. So I don't lose sight of that, and like I said, that's why it was flattering when I got the phone call that said, hey, we want you. There's not too many times you get phone calls that say, we want you. There's a lot of people that call that say, no, we don't want you. And so for somebody to say, hey, we trust, a guy that again was out for a year and a half of the coaching profession, gets
Right.
back in, has a really great run, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we want you to be our coach. And by the way, you've never been a head coach before, but we have enough trust and enough faith in you that we feel good about where you're at and where you want to be. And so that was the exciting part of it. And I just being an Ohio Northern person or somebody that is drawn to this place is just going to be someone that's going to come in and work hard and be a part of a really special place. And if you've never been to Ada, everybody's going to sit here and talk about, yeah, Ada's super small. We don't have a lot going on and it's in a small area. And we're aware of that, but we're going to embrace that. And we're not going to worry about what we don't have. We're going to worry about what we do have. And that's a really great opportunity for our players to come in and not only hopefully get you a chance to play championship caliber football, but really work towards getting a world-class degree and going out and making a difference in the world after those 4 years. Because again, we've had plenty of guys playing the pros from Ohio Northern, which is a great fact in and of itself. But we've had
Right.
more guys go out and make a difference in community and jobs and doing those things. And that's been something that I think is just super important to our guys. Like, hey, come in, work hard, have that determination to get your degree, and then go out and be proud of where you come from. Because that's the one thing I always tell people. I'm always proud to tell people where I'm from, and I want our guys to be able to do the same thing. And for whatever reason, when people come into Ada, you get a little bit of that Ada virus, a little bit, and you all of a sudden Ada sticks with you, and I think that's super special.
Now, talk to us about 2024 real quick, and then
Yep.
we'll jump into what spring ball was like and what we're expecting coming to camp.
Sure. So obviously, first year as a head coach, you get all that stuff that comes with it. All of a sudden, you show up for the meetings in August with your staff, and you're the one in charge of the meeting. So if you don't get
Mm-hmm.
that figured out real quick, that's going to be tough. So scheduling, practice plans, doing all those things, that's a lot different. Roster management, you got to make sure everybody's on the depth chart. You got to know who's coming in, what you're doing. That first year, I got here in December, but the J term really kind of messes things up. So we really didn't hit the ground running too well recruiting wise because by the time I got here, our students left.
Mm-hmm.
So we were trying to kind of figure out like I'm trying to figure out, okay, is the dining hall open during the J term? Which the answer is no. Okay, so where do we go in town to eat if the dining hall's closed? And trying to figure out all those things. And so that first year, we put together a pretty good class. I think we had about 45, 50 guys in last year's class, the spring of 24.
Mm-hmm.
Not where we wanted to be. So you're trying to figure out those freshmen as fast as possible that are coming in. The good thing is those are your guys now. Like you recruited them, and you have some of those crossover guys that you have relationships with. And so you come in as a first-time head coach, and you're like, okay, how prepared can we be? And I think the best thing I can do is just make sure that I got all my T's dotted and my T's crossed, my I's dotted. You're going to get caught off guard no matter what. So you
Right.
just got to be ready and be prepared for those things. And fortunately for us, we got off to a really great start in the last fall in 24. We win our home opener, a big win against Franklin College, a team I was familiar with coming from the HCAC. Again, that's who we played my senior year at Otterbein, lost to them in the playoffs. So any chance you get to play Franklin, you always have a little redemption story for me there. It's not the same as losing a playoff game, but you have that opportunity. And then, for us, we had an opportunity to go to Heidelberg at night, always a tough place to play. That's a big rivalry game for us as well, too. We hadn't won that game in 4 years. Our fifth-year seniors had never beat Heidelberg. You win that game, you play well, homecoming next week, and then the middle of the OAC gauntlet starts hitting you in the face after that. And we didn't play well for a stretch of several weeks. And so, the ups and the downs of being
Mm-hmm.
an assistant are a lot different than the ups and downs of being a head coach. That first head coach loss hits you a little different because for me, at least, I was reflective of, man, how can I be better, right? How
Mm-hmm.
do I get better so my guys get better? And so that was a big part of it. And so, you have ebbs and flows. And then to wrap up the season, we go on the road against BW and we lose by one because we go for two in the win with about a minute to go. We don't get it. And, you play well on the road at BW. That's great, but ultimately doesn't mean anything. And then last year, I got the chance to wrap up as a away home game for me. We've actually played at Otterbein week 10, which was a homecoming game for me, which I had a lot of friends and family there. We played decently well in the second half to end up winning the game, which obviously personally that was a special win for a lot of multitude of reasons that some people may know, other people don't know, and that's all I'm going to say. But for us, it was just it was ups and downs. It was
Mm-hmm.
everything you can ask for in a season to be able to go 5-5. But again, best record we've had here in 3 years, which I think as a head coach, you sit back and say, okay, hey, that's a positive, right? We had some
Right.
really great seniors, which carry you along, and that's the biggest thing is in Division III football. If you have a great senior class or a big senior class, you're going to give yourself a chance to win. And luckily
Mm-hmm.
for me, I inherited that. So I don't want to say oh, that was all because of me, because it wasn't. But you inherit those guys, and you got to be able to sit there and say, okay, hey, how I inherit these guys, but how do I earn their trust? How do I earn their respect? And how
Right.
will they go play hard for me and the rest of our coaches? And so it was the ebbs and flows of a season, and we played well some weeks, other weeks we didn't play well at all. But we had a 1,000-yard rusher. First time I've had a 1,000-yard rusher in a while. Our second leading rusher had, I think, 890 yards. So we were almost had two 1,000-yard rushers, which,
Okay.
as an O-line coach, that feels good. Defensively, I think we scored in probably 3 or 4 games. Those are fun when you got some defensive scores going on and picks and doing those things. And it's just the losses that aren't as much fun when you try to do a little soul searching to figure out, okay, how do we get better? I think we did a great job of indoctrinating our kids into special teams. I think special teams, we stole some reps at times, and that's something that we want to try to hang our hat on is go find our guys that are our guys that can play specials, that can play offense, that can play defense.
Right.
And again, I think the background helps because I've been around special teams, for about 4 years coaching. And so it's an interesting thing. Now, I'm still coaching O-line, head coaching duties, doing a lot of specials, but I guess you wouldn't have it any other way if you can.
Now, spring ball. There's a
Mhm.
couple things we want to unpack with spring ball. A lot of conversation going on about
Yep.
the way Division III does spring ball in comparison to the other two divisions. Would you like to see a change in the way spring ball's done? Would you like maybe a couple extra padded days? What would be kind of if there is an issue that you have with spring ball, what would be kind of your fix to it?
Yeah, and I know you had mentioned too when we had talked a little bit before pre-show stuff, like what's one thing you want to see change about Division III football, right? Like for me, it's we talk about like I understand Division III football. I love it. I'm a Division III guy. Like I'm not going to
Mhm.
shy away from that. But I think we're talking about it's year 2025 now, right? Right before I got into college football, they were barely able to use the ball.
Right.
When I went through spring practice, we had no pads, and so like it's progressively gotten better. But for me personally, like soapbox wise, like I want to see some more padded practices in those days. Like, for our sake, we talk about development and we talk about, protection of our guys and protecting them. Like we're out there, trying to make the most of what we're able to do within the limitation of the rules. But to only have 4 days where you can kind of have helmets and shoulder pads and you really still can't do much team, you can't do some of those things. I just feel like our guys are at a disadvantage. There's some negative connotation out there about Division III football from time to time, which isn't warranted, but that's just the nature of what it is. But then all of a sudden you have a recruit that shows up on a Saturday and they're like, well, why aren't you guys doing team or why aren't you guys doing those things? You're like, well,
Right.
because we can't. And so that's the frustrating part. And again, I think at some point we get to that level, but maybe not, so you got to make the most of what you can do. And, the interesting thing for us, Ohio Northern has a history over the last 20 years of going to play an international game in the spring. We have plans of doing that next spring. And so you get extra padded practices with that, which is nice. So that's kind of the benefit of doing that. It's not what it's all about. But for us, we'll see how that works. That's my first time going through that, first experience being able to do those things. So you just want to be able to work through that as best as possible. But I'd like to see him modify that as best as possible. And I know it's a competitive thing. And, obviously our guys are here for the opportunity to get a great academic experience and all of those things. But you still want to be able to play football as a football coach. You still want to be able to put the pads on and develop your guys and know that, hey, once the fall comes, all we're doing is just picking up from then and going on to the next one.
And people that listen to the show are probably getting tired of hearing me say this, but it isn't 1955. I don't see
Right.
any Division III coach, Division II coach, Division I coach going full tilt and saying, let's throw out an Oklahoma drill just for the heck of it. Like that's
Yeah.
not the goal. The goal is O linemen and D linemen. Really hard to fit up and block when there's no pads to block with.
Right.
You're you're pushing into them big bellies and whatnot. But so, Coach, how did spring ball go this year, and what is the outlook going into camp? As we're what, about a week, 2 weeks away?
Yeah, so spring ball went really well. For us, it was the third time to be able to install our deals, right? So, you rewind from a spring ago where you're out there for the first time. You got a new offensive defensive coordinator. You got new practice plans. You're doing things differently from what they're used to. So that all felt really great. It was just kind of much more. Everybody knew what the expectation was for everything. Everybody knew how practice flowed. Everybody knew offense, defense systems. Like I said, offensively, we made some subtle tweaks to some things just to be able to do that. But that's what you want to be able to do for the spring. So we had about, roster size, we had about 90, 95 guys. We probably had about 85 healthy and non-track baseball guys in out there. So we had a really great numbers to be able to run our spring ball stuff, which
Right.
was awesome. You got enough guys on each side. You're not worried about having, too few O linemen, too few D linemen, anything along those lines. And so it was really re relieving almost because, like I said, everybody kind of knew what the expectations were from the previous spring, from the fall, and everything along those lines. So it was really great. We saw a lot of really great development. We feel like some guys took into account some leadership roles and saying, okay, hey, like those seniors not coming back. So who's the next guy to step up if something goes sideways, or how do we do that? And being able to develop some of those guys that are now, you know, not every eyeball was on those guys, but now eyeballs are on those guys if something's going wrong. So it's
Okay.
always fun to kind of see who's going to be those guys, who's going to step up in those leadership roles, who's all of a sudden maybe going to be more vocal, not more vocal, and lead by example and those types of things. Fast forwarding to a couple weeks, so our guys get here in about 3 weeks. Our coaches get back next week. We got coaches from kind of all over the country, so we got some guys on vacations doing some of those things. Coaches come back next week. Players come in the fall, or I'm sorry, in about 3 weeks. And so we got a really great freshman class coming in. I mentioned, for us, we got 45, 50 guys in that first recruiting class. We knew we needed to bolster that a little bit, right? Because those numbers are a little low for where we want to be. So now
Right.
we're, upwards. We're probably about 70, 75 freshmen coming in. We feel really good about those numbers. We feel like we got some really great guys in that class. And the thing I'm most excited about is that builds our total roster up to kind of where, if you look in our conference, at least the better teams in our conference typically have the larger rosters. And so for us strategically, number one, we got to be able to house them, right? So we're not gonna over recruit just to have the numbers that don't fill lockers, everything along those lines. But we're
Right.
going to be able to have that depth that I think in some ways we were lacking last year, right? Like, for us, all of a sudden a guy needs a blow and you're like, oh, I don't know about this next guy going in. But now you bring in those depth guys and you bring in a year of development from the other guys that you had last year, you're going to be able to get into that look with everything too. And there was no secret last year. If you looked at us, we were a team that was pretty successful running the ball that we already talked about, right? With our two running backs, those guys are both back. We got some holes to fill in on the O line. Obviously, the passing game, I've been pretty transparent to the other people I've talked with. Like our passing game was our weakness on offense last year. So we got to be able to find a way to throw the ball a little bit better and be able to
Hmm.
complete some passes down the field and do some of those things. Defensively, that's where it kind of hurts with everything. We lost some really great D linemen, but we also got some coming back. Our linebacker core was pretty decimated by graduation, so we'll be looking for some new guys to step up there. And then very similar to offense, like defensively, I think teams took advantage of us through the air last year defensively. So now not only do we have to be able to throw the ball, but we got to stop teams from throwing the ball, which is weird to say, right? Because as a defense, you want to be able to stop the run, which we did a really great job of. We were pretty good in the run game, but if you stop the run game, you feel like you should be able to stop the pass game, and we weren't always able to do that. So I think we gotta find those positions that you're those guys that want to come in at those positions, work their tail off, and figure those things out. But ultimately, it's just about finding the guys that are the right fit for who we are and what we preach as a coaching staff.
Coach, how often are you looking at the transfer portal? Is that something that you guys are checking? And I asked it that way because we've had coaches that have said, couldn't tell you what my password is, have never looked at it. We've had coaches that have said, oh yeah, we look at it, but it's normally a guy that we maybe recruited. He wanted to check something else out. We kept in contact. And then Coach Janis earlier in the season said, heck yeah, anybody that tells you we're not using the transfer portal is lying. So
Right.
those are the three spectrums.
I got you. No, we use it. I know my login. I know my password. The NCAA asks a really goofy question every time. You're like, "Do you want to stay logged in for 7?" It's goofy, but we use it. We look at it. Obviously, we source it. I think Ohio Northern's different from a transfer standpoint a little bit than some of the other places I've worked at as well too. I sometimes think we're very friendly to freshmen, but sometimes we're very friendly to transfers as well too. So for us, it's just finding the right mix of guys too, right? So for us, it's probably more position hunting. Hey, what position do we really want to get out of the portal, right? It's great to be able to pull up like the portal filters just about as much as you need it to filter. So
Right.
aside from position, but like conference and division and all those things, so you can look as get into the weeds as much as you want. But for us, it's like, okay, hey, let's go find those guys, but let's kind of signify it what works best and what positions work best. And I would say in the spring we didn't land very many transfers this year. Like we had a few last year. We didn't land very many this year. The book is still open though. It's only July 22nd. You know how that goes. Sometimes guys will be reaching out, in the next week and you're scrambling all of a sudden to get some help. But we'll use it as best as possible. We'll find the right guys. Again, biggest thing for us is we just want to be able to resource those guys and make sure that they're good fits here, not only football wise, but academically too. Because academically sometimes is where we lose some guys because it's pretty rigorous. It's not, I'm not saying we're Harvard by any means, but Ohio Northern has a good academic reputation, and we got to be able to uphold that and find guys that can fill that void too.
How much did you guys, let me ask it this way. Did you guys utilize the iPads last year? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you did not use all 18 that were available to you. It's just a hunch based on
Yeah.
the staffing that a Division III program has available to them. Did you use them, and how did it work for you?
Yeah, so we did utilize them. I think the OAC actually capped us at 8. It was either 8 or 9, so we could only use up to that amount in our conference. So I think we had either 4 or 5. We had some really big issues at times with the system that we used, the particular system we used. So sometimes it worked great, other times we couldn't use it at all. So when it worked, it was awesome. Like to be able to sit as an online coach, just sit back and be like, oh, hey, this is the issue. Like we talked about that through the week and just doing it right there. And then all of a sudden it clicks a little sooner. So I think there's huge benefits. The OAC actually has a different company now that we're going to be, kind of partnering with to be able to use. So everybody's kind of on the same page with that. And so we should be able to get some of those kinks worked out with everything. But we used it when it was available to us. I think it's a really great asset. I think it's, the entry level cost of buying some iPads and getting the equipment and everything, that hurts budgetarily sometimes in doing those things. But luckily I had the support of my athletic director. That the athletic director said, "Well, hey, if you think this is really great, then let's do it." So that was really nice, and so we figure it out and do those things. But I think it's a great use of technology. It's a really great opportunity for us to again develop our guys. Where as an O-line coach, I might be able to see it, but now as a head coach, I got to on the headset, I got to say, hey, to our running backs coach or receivers coach, whoever's meeting with those guys, like pull up that play and show them this is why we failed because that was there. Then all of a sudden the guys think you're a genius and you're like, well, no, it's just football, fellas. I'm just watching it and I know the game plan hopefully as well as you do.
Now, when when the system wasn't working, I'm guessing there was an agreement, like it doesn't work here, doesn't work on the other side either. Or...
No, it was feast or famine. If it worked, great. If it didn't, great. If ours was down, theirs was up. Good for you. Now,
right.
generally, if one wasn't working, the other one wasn't either, because for the most part, they were always hooked into the same system.
Right.
But yeah, so there was, I mean, if it wasn't working and theirs was, then you were just out of luck.
And then with the technology making its way down the pipeline, I guess my next question is, do you think that we are on the verge of the in-helmet communication for you with, I'm guessing would be a linebacker and your quarterback, right?
Yeah, so I think at some point that's probably coming down the pipe. I know we had talked about it at the convention this year. Again, it's just the entry level cost point, right? Because it's not as simple as just being able to put the microphone in the headset, because if you do that, then you got to be able to plug something into the scoreboard that goes with the play clock to know when it shuts off at the play clock. And so, the helmet microphone wasn't expensive, but all of a sudden the module you got to put in the press box, you got to buy. And then you're like, well, this is all just adding a lot of things, right? And so I think at some point, if maybe that becomes a little less cost prohibitive, you look at it, because again, it helps, right? Like, again, I think a lot of teams at our level are probably either signaling stuff in now or just going super fast. So you're doing that. I know this fall the OAC is going to have some replay stuff instituted as well. So I'm anxious to kind of see how that works out. And again, it's not like we're going to be able to, it's not like our camera angles are always great in regular season games. If you're counting on a sideline press box view on a 4th and 1, you're probably better off not challenging it, because they're going to come back and say, what are we looking at? Unless it's something that's completely, outside that realm. So I think some of that stuff will be really good. And again, we'll see how that goes. But for the most part, it's just working through a lot of that stuff and figuring out how we can use it effectively.
Well, and the replay is interesting. That was kind of my last question on the technology side of the show. Does this lead to an improved experience for the student athlete in the sense, you're guaranteed 40, right? From the day you step on campus to the day you graduate, you're guaranteed 40 games. Let's say senior game 9, first half gets called for that targeting call that costs him now not only a half of football, but the first half of what could be his last football game. Do you think that the addition of the iPads and then obviously instituting replay, is that going to stop that? Because I know there's a rule, you can check it at halftime or you send the film into the
Right.
commissioner and it takes a couple days. And will that eliminate a lot of that and kind of keep people in play?
I think so. I think that's a chance for it. And I say this to evidently we got some really great thumpers on our team. We had quite a few targeting calls last year, unfortunately. And a couple that weren't called against us, but again, I won't go there. For us, it was just, and one of them was overturned. Many of them were upheld. But I think if you get that opportunity to look at it right away rather than have to wait till a halftime, like that's going to help out a football team, right? One way or the other, because now if it happens in the first half, you're not waiting around till halftime to be like, well, hey, we might get so and so back, right? But
Right.
now it's like, okay, well, hey, let them take a look and kind of figure it out from there with everything. So, it's just working through that. I think it's only beneficial, and I think as coaches, one of the things we're not great at is being patient. But I think if we can work through a lot of those things and just say, okay, hey, this is for the betterment of what we're trying to do, and we just got to work through the kinks of it, then eventually I think everything's going to work out. It's just like the iPad replay stuff or the
Right.
the sideline stuff. It's let's work through the kinks. First year didn't go like we wanted it to. I didn't have high expectations, luckily, because I was. It's not like I've had technology all the time on the sideline to help me out. So it's not like I was missing anything I didn't know I was missing. Now this year, hopefully, with the agreements we have and everything like that, we can work towards saying, okay, hey, this is what we're doing and this is what we're working for.
Well, and you say a patience issue. What we rolled this out in April, and by August everybody wasn't
Right?
ready. We
Yeah.
weren't. What do you
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms too. That all of a sudden as coaches, like I said, budgetarily, you're looking at like, oh shoot, all of a sudden we're buying 4 iPads and we're buying sideline equipment and doing that stuff, and you're like,
Right.
okay, like let's try to figure it out. And so, yeah, that the timing of that certainly didn't help either. I'd forgotten about that till you mentioned it, but that was obviously a huge part
That's
of it too.
that's the one that gets me is that we made a decision in April, and in my head when the decision come out, I'm thinking, oh, good. So 2025 season, no problem. We'll give everybody a year to unravel that. Nope.
Yeah,
Here you go.
no,
Be ready in August. So,
yeah, and it
and
was
that's
feast or famine.
I definitely wouldn't want to be a part of that committee making those decisions. So just put that
Yeah.
out there. Coach, my last question before we get into the fast five, or second to last question. What is your message to the Ohio Northern faithful?
Yeah, my message is just that we want to be able to put a team out there that you're prideful for, and when you come back and watch us or watch us online, that you have a sense of pride of being a part of Ohio Northern. And we're not. We'd love to win every week. We know sometimes that's not going to be realistic, but we want to make sure we put a product out on the field that alumni and fans and family and everybody else is proud of, and we want to play like that. We want to show that in our sportsmanship, everything like that. We don't want to be a team that teams are upset that they have to play because we're dirty or anything like that. It's just for us, we want to put a product out there that people can say, hey, I'm really proud of being an Ohio Northern Polar Bear and what they're doing up there. And, we're working towards that. We're trying to get back to that, level of, being a playoff contender, being competing for an OAC championship or being in the top half of that conference and the top half of our peers, because we know if we do that, then we're playing some really successful and really high caliber football. But there's a process in getting there. So we hope that they can understand this steps and understand the progress that we're trying to take. But the biggest thing is our expectation here is to win, and that's not anything we take lightly. We talk to our guys. We say, hey, being a part of it's great, but we're playing college football and we want to win. I don't do
Mhm.
this to sit back and feel really good about myself if we play well, because who cares? We lost. Our job here, my job here, is to uphold a legacy of what Ohio Northern football has been, try to take it to higher heights than it's been, which is a tall task, but we want to make sure that we're winning football games and developing young men into great older, younger men, and going out and being a positive part of society.
And then what is in your words as a D3 guy, What's the significance of Division III football?
I think it's all encompassing. I think I'm a great example of what a Division III football player can be. I was a very average high school student, some of my own fault, some are not on my own fault. I get an opportunity to go play 4 more years of college football. If you find the right place with the right coaches and the right environment for you, you're going to have an unbelievable athletic and academic experience. Now, it's not going to be for everybody, and that's okay. We know we're going to have guys that show up on camp, and maybe after a couple of weeks, it's not for them. Maybe after a couple of years, it's not for them. But for the right guy in the right place at the right time, it's going to be a life-changing experience. And I think that's going to be regardless if you're any division, but Division III especially, because you're going to get the experience to, be a part of the community. You're going to be a part of the academic people that care about you. You're not at some big school where professors don't know if you're in class or you're going to class remote or doing any of those things. You get the hands-on experience in the classroom. You get the hands-on experience in the football area. You get a chance to play 4 more years of football, which, there's enough people out there that can say that, but there's a lot of people who also can't say that. And I think when it comes to being hired and in the hiring cycle, all of a sudden you got guys that are like, okay, hey, we want that guy. Look what he did. He played 4 years of college football, and I think that holds some weight. And that doesn't necessarily mean you got to be the All-American on the team. You can be
Right.
the long snapper on the team. But hey, no, I played 4 years of football and got my degree at Ohio Northern. We got some really great advanced degrees that guys can get. That you add in one of those types of degrees, and then you add in football. I think that's a really positive experience. But all about being the right place, right time, and having a life-changing experience.
All right, Coach. Now it's the Fast Five. Most of these questions
Okay.
don't have anything to do with football, they're just about you.
Okay.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
I could live anywhere in the world. That's a really good question. Like I said, I've been very fortunate. I've traveled a lot in the country. I haven't been outside of the country very much. We hopefully going to Ireland this spring, like I mentioned, so I'll have to probably stay in the U.S. a little bit here. I'm trying to think. I just visited the guy that I mentioned was the best man in my wedding. He lives down in Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina is a pretty nice place. It's a nice spot to be. But I've also been to Hawaii, so Hawaii is probably going to trump Charleston. So that was a really great 10 days out in Hawaii.
I bet your wife would say the same thing.
It was a cruise, so we kind of hit all the different spots. So that was a fun pre-kids experience. So that was a nice spot. So Maui and everywhere out there, just beautiful. That would be if money, everything else wasn't an issue. If I could live somewhere I wanted to, then that'd probably be the spot.
If you weren't coaching, what would you be doing?
That's another really great question. I feel like I have some people skills. My dream as I was graduating before I got into coaching was I wanted to be in a public relations department for a Major League Baseball team. That was always something I really enjoyed. I grew up in the '90s. I was a '90 Cleveland Indians fan. They had some really great teams. So I grew up watching the Indians playing and really enjoyed that. I enjoy the communications part of things. I enjoyed learning about that and doing those things. But so if I wasn't coaching, I'd probably be in a public. I would hope to be in a public relations department somewhere for a major league team.
What's the biggest lesson that you've learned thus far over your career?
Change is inevitable, and you have to embrace it. I think for me, when I was a GA, Joe Loft, going back to Joe, he told me, he's like, hey, just so you know, in order to make this work, you're going to probably have to move 5 or 6 times. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And sure as you know what, about
Yep.
5 moves later, my wife and I have been married 11 years. We've owned 3 homes. We're on dog number 2 now. We've had 2 kids. I'm sorry, we've owned 4 homes now. And each one she hasn't picked. I've picked out each of the houses and doing those things. So luckily she hasn't minded that. But for me, change is inevitable, and you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. Which there's been plenty of days. The first, call it 90 days at each of these stops I've had, you're not very comfortable. And I think that's a life lesson that a lot of people don't get because you stay in one spot or you do one thing, right? But for me, luckily it all paid off because you made the right stops and you end up in a really great place like Ohio Northern.
Right. Uh, what is the best compliment that you ever said? This is a two-parter.
Okay.
What is the best compliment you've ever received?
The best compliment I've ever received. Football related or not football related?
Either or.
And Okay, so if you ask my close group of friends, I'll tell you this: I got great calves. So the people say I walk around, I stomp around, I got really great O-line calves. So I don't know what that means, but that people tell me that all the time. From a football standpoint, I think I go back a little bit to when I had that job at Otterbein, when I got to be the offensive line coach at Otterbein, with Tim saying, "Hey, I trust you enough to be able to go do that." And that's a huge like, it wasn't like a, "Hey, you guys played really well" situation, but it was a, "I trust you enough to be able to step away from this because you're the guy that's going to be able to take that over." And we've had some really great days where, obviously you play really well, somebody comes up and is like, "Hey man, those guys played great," and that makes you feel good. But I think ultimately, just from my personal standpoint of just knowing that Tim had enough faith in me to come in and coach the O-line and get those guys to be one unit working together.
And then on the other side of compliments, what's the best insult you've ever gotten?
Oh, I told you about that email. I got that email that I can pull up at any time, saying that basically we didn't know what we were doing as a staff and taking care of that. And that was a pretty heavy hitter there. You pull up your email and you get those things. And it's bound to happen.
Right.
I saw something today. Kirby Smart was talking on, looked like at a convention, but it was on X today, that basically, as you're put in a leadership position, you're going to be in a position to hurt people you care about. And that's the unfortunate part of it, is there's going to be some opportunities where, I really care about a lot of my guys, but sometimes they're not going to agree with how we handle things or what we do and how we do things. And so you're a little bit of a public figure, and I'm certainly not Ryan Day walking around Ohio, but in Northwest Ohio, sometimes people recognize me if I'm wearing ONU stuff or something like that. And, you take the good with the bad, and that the median is somewhere in between, that's probably where you're living. And you just got to know that you're making the right decision on what's best interests of your football team, of your university, of your school, and everything else along those lines.
And then the last question: was there a question you were expecting me to ask you? And if so, or if I didn't ask it, how would you have answered it?
Yeah, no, not especially. I think, in a space like this, sometimes you try to figure out about outside interests and some of those things as well too, right? Like, what are my hobbies outside of football? And I guess it's a shameless plug again for me to talk about my wife. They're hanging out up there in the picture. My wife, my two kids, they take up a lot of my time. My daughter just turned 8 in April. My son, who is currently hiding in the closet in my office, just turned 6. So we're in the kind of midlife of that part with everything, of just getting ready for that. And I play way too much golf to be as bad as I am, so that's an infuriating point for me. I have some buddies that are really great that let me play with them still, and that's why they have handicaps in golf. I just saw something the other day. I forget, Brent McMurphy or somebody on Twitter found out all the big time Division I coach handicaps through the GIN system. So he had that posted out there, which was a really interesting piece to see who the best by handicap was, the best golfers in the country at the Division I level. And I'm nowhere near those guys, unfortunately, but I do enjoy golfing. I enjoy going out there. For me personally, it's just a headspace thing. I get out there. I get to kind of disassociate for, 3 or 4 hours to do some of those things, and get to, it's really, for me, a shameless opportunity to go stay involved with some friends that are really near and dear to me as well too, because it gives us something that we can do that's not just sitting around and, talking on the phone or anything along those lines.
Right. Well, Coach, I want to say thank you very much, both to you and your son. It was a heck of a switch game. I will say that he was,
Yeah.
he was perfect. So were you.
Okay.
I want to say thank you very much. Good luck this year. And for those of you that are sticking around, what comes next. I believe this is our first episode of Overtime, is when this comes out, pre-recorded. So when this comes out, it'll be regular season time. So, Coach, thank you very much, and we'll be right back, Chuckleheads. Welcome back, Chuckleheads. This is Overtime with Serenity Brown. That's her. You probably noticed at the end of the episode I said I'm going to have to give her roses. I don't. We're going to go through week 1's or week 0. I call it week 0. It's week 1 officially. The standings were DB went 8-2. I went 7-3. We had 3 newcomers to our board: Logan Hansen, Tony Moose Hogan, and Mikey Schultz, two guys from Voices in the Stands, all went 7-3 with me. And then, it was a rough week for the defending champ, 6-4. 6 and 4.
Well, I started out last season not strong either, and guess what?
I
still creamed you. So
you are consistent on week 1, but you improve every year. So that's all I can ask for. I think that's all they ask for. Now, let's jump into our games this week. First and foremost, we right off the bat have a difference of opinion. Heidelberg versus Ohio Northern. So I believe Heidelberg is going to be traveling to Ohio Northern. You picked Heidelberg. DB and I picked Ohio Northern. Then we get a bunch that are a lot alike, mainly 2. Hardin-Simmons versus McMurray. We all took Hardin-Simmons. Wartburg and UW Stout. We all took Wartburg. Interesting. It means that our group is saying for sure that the WIAC this week is going to lose a game. They did not do that in week 0. They went 7-0 with one team not playing. Then we get to our another change. Serenity and I took DePauw, who is traveling to center. DB took center. Then again, Serenity took Hobart. DB and I took Brockport. I really think, and I said this privately to Mikey Schultz, I think this Brockport team really was upset last year with the 2 losses that they had being to one Final Four team, and I believe the other one was an Elite 8 team, and not getting in, the 8-2 and not getting in. So what I saw against Buffalo State was a Brockport team that has a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they really ran the score up there. So I have a feeling Hobart coming off a loss, it's going to be a hell of a game, but I think Brockport pulls that out. We then go Endicott versus Muhlenberg, 2 teams that are very similar to each other. Muhlenberg went through kind of a loss of a bunch of seniors a couple years ago. They've struggled a little bit to get back to their dominance that they had previously. Endicott really replacing a lot of people coming off of last year, but all of us took Endicott. Mm-hmm. Then we go back to Texas, as Belhaven will travel to Trinity, Texas. I'm the only one that went odd. DB being from Texas, took the Texas school, Trinity. Serenity took Trinity. I took Belhaven. I think Belhaven's a team that's going to surprise a lot of people. And I don't know that they win the conference, but I definitely look at them as a Pool C at large bid at the very least. I think that they're a very well put together team with Coach Nightingale down there. And we head out west. I like them west games because it's late, and we're going to Carnegie Mellon, so. Well, you're not going to Carnegie Mellon. DB and I are going to Carnegie Mellon. But Lewis and Clark versus George Fox. We all took Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark played very well last week under a new coach. Then, as I said, there's 2 games. I have 2 games of the week this week. I know that that's not our normal, but these are not your normal matchups. As I said, we're going to UW-Lax versus Carnegie Mellon. I'm the only one. Yinzer through and through. I took CMU at home. DB and Serenity took UW-Lax. And then what I think everybody assumes is the game of the week, especially given that Grove City had a very convincing win on the road at Cortland. Mount Union did their thing against Wheaton. But we've had a rule. There's only 2 teams that we've kind of followed that rule with, I believe. Mount Union and North Central. Until somebody beats them in the regular season, it's very hard for us as a group to pick against them. So it's a wash for the Purple Raiders. We all took them in this game. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. Grove City's going to have to avoid what happens to a lot of teams, which is Mount Union gets out on you in the first quarter, and it's just you're playing that catch-up game. I have a feeling the reason I'm excited about the UW-Lax Carnegie Mellon game, one, it's the first time I get to see the WIAC up close and personal. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know, that's the Wisconsin Intercollegiate Athletic Conference. That's all the Wisconsin schools that you've heard me frequently talk about that beat the hell out of each other for 7 weeks. And then last year, 3 of them emerged in the playoffs. Or 2 of them emerged in the playoffs. Lacrosse we had Coach Janis on earlier in this season. We had Coach Larson on last season, and then Coach Larson joined us for the roundtables. Two really great men that are leaders of men. I'm just excited to be kind of in that atmosphere and see what their game day is like. And I really think that CMU has a team this year. I think they're gonna have to run a little bit of a gauntlet after this week because you still gotta play Johns Hopkins, pretty good. You gotta play Muhlenberg, they're pretty good. There's teams in the Centennial that are it's not a slouch conference. Not that they left a slouch conference, but my final thing, and I know I haven't really let you talk in the first 2 weeks, but I know you're just happy to be. You're just reining in this that you're the champion until we get a new champion. I wanted to talk about. I forgot what I wanted to talk about. To be completely honest with you, I went off on a little tangent there and it left me. So, I made some. I'm now a contributor to D3Football.com, and in my first week, I really conference pride of being a Bethanian. I picked Bethany to win. I picked a lot of the PAC to win in opening week. That didn't happen. We went we went as a conference. The conference went 2-8-1. I'm still not sure if anybody can explain what happened with the Rowan Case Western game. I know there was lightning strikes and no contest and a tie because we declared a score. There's a lot of it's very kind of yucky and messy, way over my head. But it was not a good week for the PAC. So I'm hoping for a bounce back week, and I would assume they are probably as well. Probably looking for it. So that's kind of where my thoughts are. Do you have a final thought going into the second week?
There are no thoughts.
No thoughts?
No.
Well, you worked all day, so I understand.
Yeah.
I also did. That's why I'm a little scatterbrained. I talk. That's what I do. So, we're good?
Yeah.
All right, Chuckleheads. Well, we appreciate you stopping by and hanging out with us. Please, if you haven't yet, hit like, hit subscribe, give us a 5-star rating if you are so inclined. It really helps us out and helps the traffic.
5-star rating?
Well, I mean, yeah, we shoot for the 5-star and hopefully...
Do YouTube videos have stars now?
No, but on Spotify, because there's half of my audience is listening on Spotify, you have to give it a rating.
Really?
I believe so.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. We're also educators here. So we'll catch you next week, Chuckleheads.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Dingo Talk. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. For more info and to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter @DingoTalk.